We will now reconvene the open session of today's meeting. That sounds a bit loud, so I'm going to turn that down. We do not have a report from closed session, so we'll begin 7.1 is a resolution to open the public meeting under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act. Can I get a resolution? Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. We'll begin with a presentation from Daryl Abs, Watson and Associates, with regards to the development charges and the adjustments. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of council. Pleasure to be here today. Okay, I think that's better. Okay, not a problem. I can stand back too, if that works too. So I'm here today to present the findings of the development charges background study that we have completed and worked on with township staff. So if we go to the next slide, please. What we'll talk about today, I'll start off with the purpose, why we do the public meeting, the study process that we have undertaken, and then we'll talk a little bit about, we'll just do an overview of development charges. We'll get into some of the legislative changes that have occurred over the last few years. There have been a number of changes, and then we'll talk about some of the policy matters and implementation matters for council's considerations. We'll talk about the growth forecast, what we've included in the background study. So what's the target amount of growth and development we're anticipating, and what are those development charge rates that are required to meet the needs of that growth. And then we will kind of wrap up with a survey of development charges in the neighboring communities, and then happy to answer any questions. Next slide, please. And next slide. So the public meeting is a requirement under the Development Charges Act. And what it does is allows the public or council to ask questions about the background study. The background study is usually 200 to 300 pages long. So it's very helpful to have this kind of ability to summarize the findings of the study and allow the public and council to ask questions. So it's a mandatory requirement under the Development Charges Act. Part of the process is we need to release the background study at least 60 days prior to consideration of the bylaw. And on the next slide, I'll show you kind of how we've met that. As part of this process, we're holding kind of 2 public meetings to present the information first, and then happy to answer any questions, but as well to deal with any questions in August prior to passage in September. Next slide, please. And so with that, we've worked with township staff and just want to thank them for all their work in putting this background site together. We're having this public meeting. Again, the second public meeting is anticipated for August 10th, and then looking for council consideration of the bylaw September 8th. So more than the 60 days required as part of this public process. Next slide, please. And next slide. So development charges are a revenue tool used by municipalities to cover the capital costs associated with new development. We have new homes coming to the township. We have new businesses, and because of those homes and businesses, we need to build infrastructure to accommodate that development. Development charges are to recover those costs. They're in addition to what a developer would normally pay for as part of their subdivision. So you think about a subdivision, internal roads, water mains, sewer mains, developer builds those. The development charges are to recover the capital costs for the broader infrastructure to connect those developments to the township. Municipalities are empowered to impose charges via the Development Charges Act. And really this act guides how we create the background study, the methodology in undertaking the calculations, the public process that we're following, and then once we pass the bylaw, the implementation of the bylaw. Okay. Typically, development charges are payable and collected at the time of building permit issuance. With some of the recent legislative changes, that is now moved to occupancy for residential development, but we still calculate them at the time of building permit issuance. So this schematic here really just summarizes the money has to come from somewhere. And so if we have new users, new growth coming to the municipality, we need to build infrastructure to accommodate them. To the extent that that infrastructure is related to growth and caused by the growth, you can recover that cost from development charges. If you don't use development charges or reduce your development charges, the money has to come from somewhere to build that infrastructure, and it would come from rates if it's water and wastewater, or taxes if it's one of your other services. Next slide, please. And so very simply, what's in the background study, what really boils down the calculations to this small schematic here is we take the costs related to growth and we divide it by the growth. And we come up with a charge per unit for residential growth and per square foot of floor area for non-residential growth. Next slide, we have a more detailed components of this methodology. So the legislation provides the requirement for this methodology. We first must identify the amount, type, and location of growth and development. So where are we growing, by how much? And that detail is in Appendix A to the background study. We then need to identify the servicing needs to accommodate the growth. Then item 3 says, well, what are those actual capital costs, or what are those projects that you need to undertake to meet the needs to accommodate the growth? And those projects are detailed in Chapter 5 of the background study. Once we identify those costs, we need to make a series of deductions. If we're getting any grants, subsidies, and other contributions, the share of the cost that benefit the existing community. So if we're going to take a facility, knock it down, replace it with a bigger one, what we're replacing reflects the benefit to the existing community, and we can't fund that with development charges. Any amounts in excess of the historical level of service. So in Appendix B to the background study, what we have to do is we have to take a look at the historical level of service you provided over the last 15 years, take an average, and that sets an upper limit on how much we're allowed to include in the development charge calculation. We haven't exceeded any of the levels of service. We're under those. So that's presented again in Appendix B. And then lastly, any balance in the reserve fund. So if we have balances in the DC reserve funds, we deduct that from the calculations. And what we're left with is the net growth related costs. We allocate that between residential and non-residential benefit, divided by the growth in each category to calculate the development charge. Next slide, please. So the Development Charges Act lists out 19 services that are eligible. What we've highlighted here is what we've included: water, wastewater, services related to a highway, which is really roads, policing, fire, library, and parks and recreation services. We also have classes of service. And so a class of service is a combination of these eligible services. So we have public works, we have studies, growth-related studies, and then we also have land. So land needs to be identified separately, which we've done. Next slide, please. And so I think what I'm going to do in taking you through the legislative changes is kind of not going to go through every point, but just give you the high level points so that when we get to the end, I'll just tell you what the rules are that are in place today. There's been, I think when we put out all the legislative changes, I think there's 12 or 13 different pieces of legislative changes. So just wanted to summarize the main points here. So Bill 23 came out in 2022. That was one that most of you are probably familiar with. It was in the news the most. And really what that did was bring in a lot of reductions, exemptions, discounts to the development charge. So what we could collect before, we couldn't collect. So additional exemptions for nonprofit housing, additional residential units, so those secondary suites, affordable, attainable housing, those exemptions came in 2022. It's discount for rental housing. So if I'm going to build rental housing and I meet the definition, I get a discount based on the number of bedrooms I have between 15 and 25%. Housing was an eligible service that got removed. And then there was the removal of growth-related studies from the eligible costs. It was added back in, and same thing with this mandatory phase-in that was required, that was removed as well. There's a requirement to allocate 60% of the monies in the reserve funds for water, wastewater, and roads. And so during the treasurer statement or the annual budgeting process, treasurer will identify how much money is sitting in the reserve funds and allocate 60% to different projects. We don't have to spend the money every year, we just need to allocate it. Okay. And then the development charge bylaw was extended. They used to expire after 5 years, now they expire after 10. Next slide, please. So initially, Bill 23 brought in the exemptions for affordable housing. There was the municipal sector and some other sectors kind of told the province they didn't like the definition. It wasn't representative of true affordable housing and how we kind of categorize that within the municipal realm. And so what they did was they revised the definition in 2023, really to reflect average incomes in each community. So they post a bulletin, the province posts a bulletin, updates it every August, and that bulletin will say, this is a sale price or this is the rental price that's affordable in your community. And if you are selling or renting at that price or less, you get an exemption from development charges. You have to enter into an agreement with the municipality to guarantee that it will remain affordable for the next 25 years. There's a lot of administrative work that goes with that, but that is kind of the rules that are in place. Bill 185 then came out in 2024, walked back some of the changes from Bill 23, mainly that phase in and putting studies back in. And then it changed the process for the rate freeze that's in place. And so some of the legislative changes that have occurred since already that were included in your previous background study was this idea of a rate freeze. And so if I am proceeding my development through a site plan and zoning bylaw amendment, my rate is frozen when I submit my complete application. Once the township approves my application, I then have 18 months to pull my building permits. And if I pull my building permits within that 18 months, then I get to pay the rate when I submitted my application. If I wait longer than that, then I pay whatever the rate is of the day. It also brought in this process for minor DC bylaw amendments, and I'll mention that on the next couple of slides because they've expanded that a little bit. And then modernized public notice requirements. If your municipality doesn't have a newspaper of record, then you can just advertise on your website. Next slide, please. So then Bill 17 came in 2025, and it brought in additional exemption for long-term care homes, revised the definition of a capital cost. So what it did was it took the definition from the act and moved it to the regulations. And what that does is allows the province to make changes and not have to go through a bill amendment process that they would typically do. They can just provide notice and change the definitions. They expanded the simplified bylaw amendment process. So this one's actually pretty good for municipalities. If you're going to repeal the DC bylaw expiry date or change it so it aligns with the 10-year process, or remove indexing or decrease the development charge for one or more types of development, you can go through this simplified process. So you don't need to undertake a background study, have a public meeting. All you need to do is pass the bylaw. Once you pass the bylaw, you provide notice that the bylaw passed, and that's it. There's no appeal to the OLT. It's just in place. So fairly good change there. The big change here was the deferral of development charge payment to occupancy for residential development. And so if the developers want to, they can pay at the time of occupancy. So what typically has been happening is municipalities now require occupancy permits. So before you get your occupancy permit, then you would pay your development charge at that time rather than at the time of building permit. So really it's a delay of cash flow for the municipality. We used to be able to charge interest on installment payments for rental housing and institutional development. We can't charge interest anymore. If we go to the next slide, there's this lower charge for the rate freeze. This really applies to municipalities that will reduce their development charge. But essentially, we do that rate freeze process I just explained, whatever the lower of the two is. So if when you submitted your complete application for site plan or zoning bylaw amendment, the rate was actually higher than the rate of today, you would still pay the lower rate. Okay? They had to bring this in because when some municipalities like Vaughan and Mississauga reduced their development charges, the rate freeze provision said that they still had to pay the higher rate. They couldn't get the discount. So then there's grouping of services for the purposes of credits. This doesn't apply too much in the township, but if you had a developer building a development charge related project, let's say a pipe or something, maybe a road that's in the DC study, they could get credits for building that infrastructure. And so what they've done here is allowed some grouping of services, but I'll talk about that on the next slide. They've expanded the reporting requirements for the treasurer's statement. So I mentioned that you have to allocate 60% of the balance in the reserve funds for water, wastewater, and roads. Now you need to do that for all services as part of the treasurer's statement. And I think this is just in part transparency from the province. You know, there was some stuff in the news about municipalities sitting on hoards of cash. And I know you probably look at the books and say, well, we don't have hoards of cash. But so what they want to do is they want municipalities to say, okay, well, what do you have in your reserve funds and what are you spending it on? The straight answer is, well, what's in the DC study is what we're going to spend it on, but they just want a little bit more rigor in the annual treasurer statements. Okay, and then there was an additional index added, but again, that won't impact you. If we go to the next slide, further changes. So they said there's a lot of changes here. There's addition of class of service for land. So really one of the things we needed to do is we needed to take a look at all the capital projects in our list, and we need to take land out and just put it in a separate table. Really the crux of it. When we look at our historical level of service, we just needed to take land out of that for all the services. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. The merging of credits. So for water and wastewater services, credits are now merged. And so essentially, if I'm a developer and I build a water pipe on your behalf, it's a DC project, I can get credits for that. I can apply, usually what would happen is I would go and I would pull my building permits, and every time I go pay my development charge, I just don't pay the water component until I run out of credits. Now I don't have to pay the water and the wastewater component until I run out of credits. It can create some cash flow issues, but it's something that the treasurer would just need to do a financial analysis to see if there'd be an impact. But again, probably not a huge impact for the township. There's some additional reporting requirements in the background study. It wasn't long enough, so we needed to add some more information to the background study. So we added another appendix that sets out the details on how we approach the calculations for benefit to existing. Again, further reporting requirements. The treasurer's statement needs to be completed by June 30th every year and submitted to the minister now by July 15th. Previously, these weren't required to be submitted to the minister, but now they are, presumably that they're going to start to take a look at these treasurer statements and compare them. And then there's copies of the background study and local service policy could be required to be submitted as well. And then lastly, there's a local service policy requirement. Previously, there was no requirement. We always included a local service policy. And what that really does is just identifies what's the developer need to pay when they build their subdivision versus what goes into the DC study. So luckily, the legislation kind of follows the process we've already been taking for years. So no changes required there. And then lastly, and hopefully lastly for a while, I'm really hoping, another change is really just an exemption for nonprofit retirement home developments. So that exemption will be added to the bylaw. There was an announcement for the development charges reduction program. I'm sure you're aware and you've talked about it. Really, it was $8.8 billion over 10 years for municipalities across Ontario. For housing enabling infrastructure, but you'd be required to reduce your development charge by 30 to 50% and maintain that for a period of 10 years. And municipalities would also have to contribute 10%. And so ultimately it boils down to you reduce your development charges, whatever money you're going to lose from that, the province and feds would give you 90%. You would have to pay 10% of that from non-DC sources. And that was kind of the intent of the program. Next slide, please. Okay, so after all that, number of exemptions and discounts. So ultimately, what's in place today? So upper tier, lower tier governments don't charge each other development charges and school boards as well. If you have an industrial building, you can expand that building up to 50% and you don't have to pay development charges. Anything above that, you would pay development charges. Development of lands intended for use by a university is also exempt. As well, colleges would be exempt if they're crown corporations. You can add up to 2 apartments in an existing or new detached, semi-detached, or row house, and you don't have to pay development charges. And that can either be 2, let's say, basement apartments or 1 basement apartment, 1 on a garage, for example. You can add 1 unit or 1% of existing units in an existing rental residential building. Affordable inclusionary zoning, the nonprofit housing, affordable rental, affordable owned, long-term care homes, nonprofit retirement homes are all exempt. Attainable units will be exempt when the province provides a definition. They're still working on that, to my knowledge. And then lastly, there's a discount for rental housing that I mentioned. Next slide, please. And so in addition to those mandatory exemptions, council does have the authority to reduce the charge in whole or in part for different classes or categories of development. You can phase in the charge over time as well if you want. And what's not in the legislation but has been provided through case law is redevelopment credits. And so if I have a single detached home, I knock it down and I build 3 townhomes. Well, what we do is we calculate the charge for 3 townhomes, subtract the charge for 1 single detached, so you get credit for what's there. The proposed exemptions continue from the previous study, which is the cemeteries, hospitals, non-residential farm buildings for bona fide farm uses, nonprofit organizations, and assisted or social housing. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the local service policy identifies what the developer pays versus what goes into the development charge study. Again, this is now a specific requirement of the legislation. We've reviewed it and ensured that it's in line with the legislation. And so that's included in Appendix E to the background study. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into kind of the numbers of the background study, what we're looking at in terms of a growth forecast is about 2,600 people over the next 10 years in about 1,300 units and about 1.15 million square feet of non-residential floor space. Over the longer term to 2051, about 6,254 units or people, 3,354 units, and just under 3 million square feet of non-residential floor space. We also then separately categorize the urban area, and this is used for the water and wastewater calculations. So about 7,300 people, 3,200 units, about 2.3 million square feet of floor space. So with the calculated rates, I'm not going to go through all the numbers in this table, but just point you to the fact that we have different categories for the residential development. So single and semi-detached dwellings versus other multiples, which are your townhomes, apartments, 2 bedrooms plus, apartments, 1 bedroom and studio, and a special care, special dwelling unit charge as well. On the non-residential side, we have the charges on a per square foot basis. And then we also have charges for wind turbines, which you'll see are the same charges as a single detached, but just for certain services. So roads, fire, policing, and growth studies. And then similarly for solar farms, but it's charged on a per square foot of the floor or of the gross area of the panels. Okay, next slide, please, and I'll compare the rates. So what your current rate is today. If we're looking at the just the township wide is $10,756 for a single detached, going up to $18,293. And you can see the main part of that increase is with respect to parks and recreation services. We have identified all those parks and recreation needs in here, and really that's the main increase. On the flip side, when we look at the water wastewater services, because of the Hughes funding that you received, we were able to reduce the water charge quite significantly. And so overall, if you're building in the urban area, your charge is actually going down slightly from 39,120 down to 38,910. Next slide, please. Now on the non-residential side, we see very similar numbers. So from the township wide, it's $2.52 going up to $2.84. But if you're in the urban area, going down from $8.30 down to $6.27 per square foot. Now, one of the things we did just in preparation, things are moving really fast with the province, as you're aware. We wanted to, just in case you were looking at some reductions, just to see what the numbers would look like. If we go to the next slide, just provide a comparison so you could see if you were to take your current rates and reduce them by 30%, instead of charging 39,120, you'd be charging 27,384. Whereas the calculated rate is 38,910 for single detached. Okay, so I understand you were not intending to submit an application for that. A number of municipalities that I've talked to did not submit an application with respect to the funding, given some of the challenges. But just wanted to put this out here just because we had to prepare the presentation in advance. Next slide, please. And we included the non-res again because the reduction would only apply to the residential. So we wanted to show that the non-residential charges would stay the same. And next slide. And one more. Perfect. So with the survey of comparators, where we're looking at your neighboring municipalities, you can see in the Millbrook area, wouldn't change your relative position in the survey, but did reduce the charge very slightly. But the township-wide services would increase as noted. And next slide, please. And we look at commercial on the per square foot charge. Again, with the urban area, you're still in the middle of the range, but it's decreasing slightly. And for the township-wide services, you're increasing, but again, still at the very end of the survey. And lastly, for industrial, same thing. If we're taking a look, the charges for Millbrook area would decrease. and the charges for the township-wide would increase, noting that one of the exemptions that we did not include, or the discounts we did not include at this time. If council wants to, they can, but we didn't include them, is the reduction for industrial developments for the township-wide services. So under the current bylaw or the previous study, what we did was we reduced these the DC for the township-wide services just for industrial developments. Okay, we kept the water wastewater, but removed it for the township-wide. Under this proposed bylaw, we didn't make that adjustment. Next slide, please. And next. So with that, what we were planning on doing subsequent to this, happy to answer any questions. We'd come back August 10th for another public meeting, allow the public and yourselves to ask more questions before we bring forward the bylaw September 8th. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Daryl. A lot of legislation to go over, and I think the amount of changes are frustrating from a municipal standpoint to keep up with, and probably from the development community too, to keep track of, because it's a constantly shifting environment rather than, sort of pausing to really take a deep dive and investigate what could be a better solution or a better result. We just keep coming up with new, Band-Aid solutions along the way. And it sounds as though this DCRP is sort of that next iteration of that confusion. Is there anything that you can, I think there's still, as municipalities, I've been reading the news last night and this morning, municipalities are most of them are hitting their sort of last meeting before a bit of a summer break. And a lot of them, it seems as though, are choosing not to participate at this time because of the ambiguity as to how it's going to work. And in rural municipalities, I think far fewer of them are in this sort of surplus or healthy, robust reserve of DC amounts because the costs are associated with it and are spent and are planned to be spent. So is there any clarity that you might be able to provide now? I know it seems like in the last 2 weeks, we've got a little bit more of an understanding of the DCRP program, but I don't have as someone who reads the news about this constantly and is looking for the provincial releases, I can't tell you exactly how the intention or how the rural municipalities can expect to be influenced or impacted by participating in this program or not. I know we don't need to make that decision today, but it's an element of what we're have to consider from the DC standpoint. So is there any way that you could maybe give council just a snippet of sort of where we are and where we might expect to be over the next few months as we work on this file?
Yeah, so I think with respect to the program, that's kind of what I'm hearing from a lot of more like small towns, even medium-sized municipalities are kind of in the same boat where the intent of this, right? Like the way that I would always explain it is, the province has been saying for years, reduce your development charges. And municipalities said, well, we can't afford it. We need to build infrastructure to accommodate the development. And I said, okay, well, let us pay for 90% of it. Okay, so that kind of works in high growth municipalities where their DC is very high. But in your community, your development charge is about 40,000 all in with water and wastewater. Even if you reduced your charge by half, that's $20,000 a unit. Even if you got 100 units a year, right? Maybe that's $2 million. And then over 3 years, maybe $6 million, maybe if you're growing at that rapid rate. And so what a lot of people did is they did this analysis and they showed that if we're being realistic on how much growth we're actually planning to achieve, that this program is not going to provide a lot of funding. So I think a lot of kind of townships and towns are in the same boat. With respect to where we're going, I think it's challenging because we're moving very fast. Like giving municipalities 18 days to submit on this, including weekends, was very, very quick. So I'm hoping that the province, I know that they've announced that there was going to be a second round of funding for small, rural, and northern municipalities. Now, I think what they were intending was that if you had a development charge bylaw, you would fall under this round of funding. And under the other program that they're potentially coming out with, maybe it would be those without a development charge bylaw. But I'm hoping that in light of the municipalities who haven't submitted, there's a lot of municipalities who didn't submit, they might reconsider that and then figure out some other funding that might be available to assist with less rules and strings attached.
Yeah, well, in some of the reading with some of the considerations for those municipalities I think a lot of them are more larger urban areas that are facing, I can what scared me was that some of the projects that they're talking about for their applications are in excess of $1 billion. And so when you get multiple urban centers, like there's 444 of us, or 443, I think now, you know, that if one of those is potentially applying for a bill, or multiple of them are applying for $1 billion worth of funding, because, you know, they're only on the hook for the 10% locally, that $8.8 billion is going to vanish in a hurry. And there's no surety, especially being on an application basis, there's no surety that you're going to be made whole. Like, because it's subject to, is the money available, and you're competing with these massive projects. And I think every project is massive depending on the scale of the municipality. You know, what's $1 million for us, it's $1 billion for them. I understand that there's a ratio there, but it's concerning when you're being asked to consider a significant reductions on the promise of a consideration of an application. Like, because, you know, especially in municipalities like ours that are working strategically to facilitate and manage growth. Well, part of that management process has created a deficit in DC charges, that we're having internal loans that are, yes, we're benefiting from the interest payments, but, you know, we're the opposite end of the spectrum from having surplus reserves, you know, that we're just not spending for whatever the province deems inappropriate. So that's, you know, it's concerning because there's not a free pass, and with the freezing of the impact circumstances and the taxation rates, like it couldn't be a worse time to sort of roll the dice and making these massive reductions. And the other problem that I have with it is there's no detailed facilitation or controls that the province is having to say, okay, well, where those municipalities do it, we want to see that reflected in the purchase price. Like, you've already waived the tax on new purchases, but, you know, we have, when I compare our DCs to, you know, nearby municipalities like City of Wood Lakes, like Durham, you know, we're a fraction of what they are already. But if you look at the list prices of, you know, like for like homes, there's not a significant variability, and there's certainly not a variability in line with the DC reduction. And yeah, the lower cost of land acquisition in rural areas too, towards that, it's like, well, the margins are just getting better, and there's no there's an abundance of carrots, but there's no stick to say, well, we're hoping that this is going to reduce new home actual list prices, but the market's going to dictate that. So there's a lot of concerns. And, you know, I think the other concern on a macro basis is the constant annual change to how a very important piece of municipal funding and planning is constantly being adjusted. Like, we're having to work with, you know, consultants like yourself, no disrespect, but staff time to go over and make our DC bylaws consistent on it. It's a month-long project or months-long project every year. And that I can't imagine the development community enjoys that, because what I was paying last year is maybe not what I'm paying now. And there's just so much change. It's got to kind of stop at some point and say, either we've got it right now and this is how it's going to be for 3 to 5 years, or, you know, this is the last adjustment that we're going to make. Because there's a lot of conversations about adjusting the property taxation system that we have, that's been, you know, in place for, you know, more than 100 years, and hasn't reflected what's now being funded by it versus what was intended to be funded by it. So, but I appreciate your help, because God knows that legislation is thick and ambiguous to start. Questions from members of council with regards to Daryl's presentation? Councilor Brink.
Through the chair, a lot of material to try to digest in 5 days and try to understand it. And at this moment in time, I have no confidence in myself that I could tell anybody in this township, if they want to do anything, what this tax might add to the cost of doing it. What I really like to put you on the spot for is something to the mayor's effect. I'm more concerned with the economy being in such a dire strait, and the next 3 years look like it's going to continue the downward trend. The likelihood is that the development that we're going to spend money on now, hoping for in the future, may not even exist. And then the other dilemma is, if the federal government and the provincial government try to buy votes by eliminating or castrating the development charge tax, where are we left with the possibility of ever recouping the debt we go into?
Yeah, so through the mayor, I think it really depends on the services we're looking at. So something like water and wastewater services, you really have to invest in the infrastructure before the development comes. So you can get into that issue. The good thing in your case is you do have quite a significant amount of Hughes funding to offset all the costs on the infrastructure side. For the other services, the softer services, Parks and Rec and library and things like that, it tends to follow the population growth. So if your population is not growing as fast as you anticipated, then you wouldn't build the things you need to accommodate that growth. So because you can build the infrastructure after the growth comes, you can slow down your capital expenditures and limit your exposure there. Things like water, wastewater, you need to build before the development comes. All the other services you can build after. So I think it's working with the township staff to understand the timing of those capital expenditures that would be development charge funded. Focused on water, wastewater, you do have some good grant funding to offset that. So I think you're in a pretty good spot, even if something did happen with development charges. I don't think it will, but if something did happen, I think you're in a good spot to manage it and figure out what to do by maybe delaying the capital expenditures for things that are not water, wastewater.
Yeah, and I think we've also had the benefit of being diligent about mapping out with the capital forecast and the planning of these sorts of things. Like, we haven't had the luxury to be able to wait around for certain amenities when they require adjustment or things of that nature. You don't always get to wait for them to happen, but I think we're somewhat fortunate, and it's not, it's because I think partially due to good planning is that, we've been able to get a significant number of our municipal structures redeveloped to a modern standard for the community as it stands now, and that will serve the community as it moves forward, rather than those that have maybe put those things off and are now jeopardizing the fact that, well, we were hoping to plan for them, but we're planning for them when we have more money in the bank, and now we're not going to get as much more money in the bank as we thought. So, having a lot of those capital projects in our rearview mirror that even during the tariff instances of the last iteration of the US government, we were able to get them done, and we had some cost overruns to get them done, but it's certainly far cheaper and far more comfortable to have that funding arrangement for those having been done than if you were planning for them in the future. That's for sure. So it's definitely concerning, but like I said, there's lots of gossip about the reduction and removal of DCs altogether. I really don't think that can happen as a possibility, because the province doesn't have any money right now, given the deficits they continue to rack up, to offset that from a higher level of government standpoint. But also, I don't think they could do that without really taking the bull by the horns of reevaluating the property tax methodology, because there's a growing call for that as well. I think we've had conversations at the county where the county is the ratio of the taxation of the county is paying for up to 30% of the total tax levy is going towards provincial responsibilities, which were not in the original planning and drafting of these property taxation. So that's just a download. So it would be nice for everyone from an economy standpoint to be able to remove 30% of the total levies for these services that we're having to take on, not bull, but by the horns. But if the province is going to pick that up, the tax increases from a property tax standard would be astronomical. And it really undermines or speaks in, I think, opposition to the pursuit of affordability. Because if you don't have a mechanism to reduce the end list price from the market standpoint by all these cost reductions, at the end of the day, you're just increasing a margin for a private business, which benefits them greatly and might benefit a few individuals and speculators on that regard. But it's a big concern, but it's too foundational. And this is the province has created this mess and they have the control over the DC Act. They make it. And these, yearly adjustments are ridiculous and nothing that's ever been seen before from a legislation in any category of, let alone one of the most important fiscal categories for every municipality across the province. So hopefully we'll figure this out, and it will at least get some stable waters to navigate for the time being. But thank you for that. Councillor Natchoff.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Very knowledgeable. I just want to commend the mayor on making a lot of really lucid and intelligent points there of where we kind of stand now and where the future kind of goes. I'm sure coming to see us today was probably one of the better municipalities that you could have this conversation with. Once again, to commend the CAO and the finance department for putting us in positions where have a little more flexibility and maneuverability, where other communities may not be in quite as good a shape as we are. And to echo the mayor's sentiments of the goalposts continuously being moved every few years, makes everybody's job a little more difficult. So not as much a question as just optimism is kind of a difficult thing to find at times. So the challenges of the provincial government and what's happening. So anyway, just wanted to get that out there. Thank you.
Well, Daryl's been a big part of helping us through that, so let's give Daryl a little credit too. Why not? And the only other question I'd ask in extension of that comment was just sort of, is there any understanding or any sort of comfortability? What concerns me the most is when they apparently come out with this Northern Ontario, I think it was mostly billed as a Northern Ontario, but really remote Ontario pertaining to most places that don't have DCs because they don't have growth and haven't ever planned for it. What concerns me is that oftentimes there's allusions to rural streams of funding for the same purpose and the same legislation. But what seemingly happens is that you wait to hear when that rural stream comes and they say, oh, that was that other thing. That was, oh yeah, no, they were told at the time when the announcement came out, well, you're gonna get a rural stream and it's gonna have a dedicated 20 million, 30 million, whatever here. And then only to find out that that never happens. And that they say, well, that money was actually this other application stream that you've already been using forever. Like, to me, that's not the establishment of a rural nuanced fund. That's a bait and switch. And so my concern is there any rumblings or any understanding, like you said, as that only really pertains to places without DCs at all now, and we're kind of just caught in the purgatory of the middle between those, billion-dollar applications and no DCs whatsoever. Is there any conversation about how, like, is there any feedback? Because you're engaged in this sort of conversation, doing this work for municipalities like ours and bigger, like you said. So is there any understanding or any sort of even a timeline when we might know exactly how, like, the middle that represents the majority of municipalities in the province will ever be sort of spoken to directly about how these changes will impact us?
No, so I think, yeah, we're not sure. I mean, the application date just closed for the DCRP on Friday. That moved really quickly. I know that the province has been in consultation with some of the municipal organizations. So they are getting feedback from members across the province. And so I'm hopeful that they're going to hear that. They're going to kind of react and maybe start to think about a different stream of funding. I'm not sure. It's really up to the province. I know that they're going to be busy for the next few months evaluating these applications because they're going to be looking to execute these agreements by August. So I think in any case, I think it's going to be maybe later this year or next year if they do anything, because they're focused on getting as many DC reductions in place as they can, I think, is kind of the goal.
I don't know if this question is for Daryl or for Kimberly. Sorry to put you on the spot, Kimberly, but I guess one of the things I don't really understand about the DCRP is either, and I think you would need an example or an application to maybe get the right answer, but when they allude to a project, and the municipal share would be 10%, it's just such a foreign way of considering, like, usually there's a DC, if it's DC eligible, it's DC eligible. So we're like, okay. And then usually it's rare that 100%, it's 100% DC eligible for anything because there's, like you said, a existing user benefit. I wonder, Ms. Pope, and maybe for the purpose of a future one, when we get some more clarity, it might be helpful to take an existing project that we may have completed and say, okay, well, here's how it worked from a DC eligibility standpoint for this project. It was 80% DC eligible. So the 80% came, and then municipal existing benefit portion was 20% in that case. But when we're talking about applications requiring reductions and it's a 10% portion and the rest of it is going to be shared, like, I don't know if that's a good deal or a bad deal. And I know it depends on the application, but if we're going to potentially consider applications, I think it would be helpful to have an understanding of, well, here's how this type of facility, like you can take the works yard, for example, this is how the breakdown was, and we were on 25%. If we were 10%, it would have been this. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of details to come out, but understanding that, I think my concern is that the ambiguity about whether you'll ever get the grant, and now the project just dies on the hill, and it's a bit of a confusing sort of definitely an unsettling place to get to. But I think it might be helpful to understand maybe in certain projects, a 10% is a discount, or a better deal than potentially otherwise. So I would assume when we're talking at the county too, like if there's county applications, there might be some that make sense, and maybe a 10% share of the total project is a significant win for the municipality, right? In comparison to what the alternative would be if we just hold pat. Because this conversation is impacting all these municipalities, and I just, we're talking, there's lots of rumors when I talk to people at the county about, oh, we could do this project is one we might apply for, but we don't know all the details about the lay of the land when it comes to the municipalities sort of at our level. But more importantly, I don't know if 10% is, where that's a good idea and where that's potentially a bad idea. So maybe in this book, is that something you maybe speak to? And then maybe Daryl if he has anything to add.
I'll just speak briefly to that. So with the number of changes, even up to a webinar that was done just a couple of days before the submission date was, there were constantly changes in what was being interpreted, what was being communicated. And even Daryl and I spoke earlier, and you can speak to that piece, but how in part of their legislation, they contradicted themselves when they put out a frequently asked questions. So we were very confused even through this process. So I'm not trying to pretend that we understood everything in full, but when you think of DCs, we go for the maximum that we can, recognizing our limits if we haven't spent in the past or we hit our ceiling limits, because if that's the portion that should go through the new owners, that should be DC, and it shouldn't go to the current owners, right? So once we get through that, we have our past bylaw. That's exactly what we're saying. We're saying, okay, this portion here we can get from DCs, that's future development related to growth. And the other portion is actually coming from the tax base when we're funding a project. And we always look for grants on the tax base side to try to maximize the dollars to move forward. This particular funding program, where they're talking about 90%, go back to your 100% DCs that we were collecting that we weren't paying for to begin with. And it has nothing to do with our residents. So we don't want to pay for any of that. And they're only coming to the table for 90%. So what they're asking us to do is put in the other 10%. Well, where are we getting that from? You can't double stack and get another grant for it, so you can't go there. So guess who's paying that? It's the property tax base, which is ridiculous. So that in itself was irritating to hear, and how we're going to fund that. And then other information that came later was about how we couldn't then apply. So if we apply for this side of the fence to help the developer get some additional funds back and supposedly pass it on to the property taxpayer, which that happens or not, who knows? Then on the other side, our portion, we couldn't then turn around and apply for a grant because there were certain grants that said we couldn't duplicate or add to. We're not duplicating the money. We're looking, so in our perspective, we're going to look after our own first, not the developer. And so it's our taxpayers that we want grants for. We want grants for our side of the dollar, not theirs. If they weren't causing us to go over on the other side, sure, let's apply. But, and it was so frustrating because at one moment we were, it looked good and there were so many pieces of it. It's like, okay, great, we'll get some funding. And then the different rules and the changes, it's absolutely ridiculous to throw something at us over 18 days, including a weekend, not even opportunity to come forward and talk to our council about it, and then cause us to sign on the dotted line when we don't even have we may or may not have your support. So the whole process is incredibly frustrating. That's my opinion.
Received. And I guess, Daryl, the only other question I had about one of the elements, because you mentioned when we got the Hughes funding, that was allowed us to reduce sort of the DCs from a water wastewater standpoint. One of the areas that I think we're fairly optimistic, and I've talked to not our MP, but a neighboring MP, that's a part of the government, about these applications for this Build Canada Fund or Building Strong. I can't get the narratives all right. There's so many of them, but from a recreational standpoint, because we have identified, in the plans, different investments in recreation that we have identified in the bylaw, as you've alluded to. I'm assuming that, if we're successful, whether it's Trillium or otherwise, or this Build Strong Communities or Resilient Communities funding, will there be a similar adjustment to the ability, like any funding that we receive for those would, if we get $2 million for a playground, for instance, that same sort of adjustment, instead of like a significant increase from a Parks and Rec standpoint, from an investment standpoint, that would also be reduced if we get any sort of applications in that regard. Okay. And so how would my question, I guess, is, I figured that was the answer, but is that something we do like intermittently? Like if we receive a significant grant, you know, for that, could that be amended like on the fly, or is it only amended sort of on the renewal basis?
Yeah, so it's up to you. So because of the development charge bylaw expires every 10 years, it requires you to come back and look at everything every 10 years. There's going to be projects on here where you might estimate a cost and it's going to come higher because maybe the costs have gone up faster than inflation. And so, you know, you can update the DC when the costs go up. You can update the DC when the costs go down. So it's really your choice. You'd really want to take a look and see order of magnitude. Is it really going to make a big difference on the charge? If it is, and you want to update your development charge, you do have that simplified amendment process where you don't even need to see me. I won't have to come. You can just pass a bylaw. You can update the calculations, do a staff report, pass the bylaw, provide notice, and you can reduce the charge. So you can do that.
Yeah, that sort of adjustment was what I was hoping was covered in there. So it's good to know that it is, and it's a very simple process. We don't have to go through a background study, revision or amendment. It's just, hey, we've been successful in this funding and we based on the calculations, we can reduce it by that much. And I think it's better. DCs are important and what we've identified is accurate, but where we've had the benefit of funding, I don't want to overcharge the development community, and I think we're optimistic, or we've been led to believe to be optimistic about certain applications we're trying to get in. So I just think it's good to, and also just to demonstrate that, like, that's supporting the development community as well, to say, hey, we're trying to charge you the true amount for the true plan. And when there's funding that we receive, we adjust for it. I think that makes sense. Kimberly?
I just want to clarify while our consultant is here. So in the simplified process, because we've never used it, it's new legislation that we're potentially able to use. You had indicated about the decrease. That totally made sense to me. And the decrease, we could bring it forward. But when you just use your example and you talked about an increase in some other areas, if there's an overall, it has to be an overall decrease to the rate to use the simplified process, right? Thank you. So if we had an increase and the decrease didn't offset it, we couldn't come with a simplified version for an increase, just for clarification.
Got it. Thank you for that. Sorry to cannibalize the microphone. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Burke.
Through the chair, I can sympathize with Kimberly. I've been looking for definitions, and the one that struck me was on page, what is it? 219, they talk about transparency and they use the word appears might happen. So that tells me everything about the government. But I would like to look at page 71 if we could, please. We're talking about forecasts for population and all this stuff and speculation on who's coming. Anyways, I just wonder, with our typical way we've increased in population here, we struggled on Tower Hill South for years. It got way behind, and that was when the times were better economically. And then I look at the last row of titles, all at 155. How do you get that consistency with a track record that has not reflected that at all?
Yeah, so through the mayor, so we, when we do these calculations, we actually, a lot of times we don't even provide this table anymore, because what we're looking at really is the total increment, less so on the annual basis, but the total increment. So so we're looking at how much are we going to grow in 10 years, and if we grow by that much in 10 years, what's the capital we need to accommodate that 10 years of growth? If we were saying, well, we're not going to grow that much in 10 years, we're going to grow by 50%, likely we would reduce all the capital costs in the charge as well, and likely it would work out to be the same development charge. So it's really for planning purposes to say, okay, well, if we grew by that much, what would be the capital needs? Yeah, you're right. You're going to get fluctuations, especially in a community like yours, where you'll have maybe some lower years and all of a sudden a big subdivision will come in and then it'll spike up and you'll have some lower years. So yeah, it's not meant to be an exact, if you don't hit this, that's okay. It's just to guide our calculations and kind of what's in the plans.
Yeah, so in essence, it's you forecast a total amount and you just, retroactively divide it amongst the years that you have it. Okay. Councilor Byrne, another question?
Through the chair, now in your notes, you also reference that we have a very small public portion of today But the big players that were gonna be here or expected to be here were gonna be the developers and the real estate people and all that. Can I guess the reason they're not in the room today is because they've already come to the table somewhere else at some other point and put their concerns forward?
Through the chair. So, I'm not sure if they've reached out directly to the township, but a lot of times what happens, and this is fairly common for the public meetings. Sometimes what happens is they might see the charge, they might get the notice, they might look at the background study, and the charge in the urban area is going down. Then they say, well, okay, what am I gonna come here for? And say, thank you, maybe, right? Sometimes that happens, but sometimes I get a thank you, but most times I don't. But sometimes what we see is they're not as engaged. And so, yeah, like they'll see it, they might see the newspaper article, they might look at the dollars and say, you know what, that makes sense. And there's nothing in here that concerns me, so I don't need to go to that. Township can keep doing what they're doing. If they saw something that concerned them, which a lot of times they'll hire their own consultants, they'll look through the background studies, they'll look at the charges. If they have something that concerns them, they will be here, or they'll be sending letters to the township and to the mayor and the clerk to add into the agenda. So because we haven't heard that, then likely it's because they've reviewed it and had no issues. But we are having a second public meeting again, so if there is any concerns, they have ample opportunity to bring those up.
Yeah, I think the majority of the developers send their concerns and to the province directly with regards to the changing legislation. But I mean, even the private sector, from my conversations, they can't keep up. So it's really hard to tell. But in our municipality, when you're dealing with DCs that are above a third of, neighboring municipalities, they're going to save their fodder for those municipalities where they're dealing with, hundreds of thousands plus in revenues. And I'm sure those public meetings have been well represented in that regard too. But I know there's been a lot of conversations with the province about from the development community about getting these sorts of things done. But I think there's also that little bit of concern and ambiguity as to how it's going to impact, how it's going to pursue the actual, desired result, but also, to manage how we even transitioning to the occupancy is a bit of an issue when it comes to the enforcement standpoint. So it's a lot of muddy water. Go with Deputy Mayor, and then I'll go to Councilor Burke.
Through you, Chair. I mean, the DC charge thing it's obviously way more impactful in much larger centers. When we look at, the number of elements that are chargeable from our perspective, I think we're like 6 or 7 of the 20 possible things, right? So again, to the mayor's point, I mean, the development charges that we have on the books, aren't even comparable to, some of these larger places that can have, all 20 of them hitting them, or 18 of them, whatever number there was, I forget what it was. But so when they start pushing this whole, reduced by 30%, I mean, you have a lot bigger number of categories to start knocking things down a little bit, whereas we only have a handful of them, and trying to pull out of those makes it very, very difficult to hit this 30. And it kind of loops back to, the province treating everybody equally. Well, we're not equal. Like we're definitely not equal when we only have a certain number of things that we're eligible to charge DCs on, and we're still expected to pull the same percent out of it. So there's a huge disparity there. And I kind of hang my hat, and I'm really hoping that this concept of, the rural, Northern Ontario, whatever you want to call it, Act factors that in, right? And factors in, the eligibility of what you're allowed to charge and what you're collecting. And that should be more proportionate to, what you should be expected to reduce. Because overall, the development charges we have here must look pretty sweet compared to to some of these other places, right? Anyway, just my comment on that. I don't know if you want to comment back or not. Feel free.
Well, there's also the reality of the ability. Yeah, the also, just to build on the point, the reality is the ability of a municipality to create 10%. Your 10% portion of a potential application, if there's only, 4,000 or so properties to divide that up, that's a lot harder to afford a 10% portion of an application than it is for a place with hundreds of thousands. So, but Councilor Burton, you were next.
Through the chair, I had dozens of questions. I wonder, is there a possibility there you're accessible between now and the next public meeting that I might be able to interact and go through these smaller details at some time?
Yeah, absolutely. Through the chair, definitely happy to work with township staff. And if you want to maybe work through Kimberly, she could probably answer most of your questions, and then if there's anything I need to assist with, I'm happy to assist.
Seeing no other questions, we are in a public meeting, so we're going to open it up for members of the public wishing to speak. And we'll allow Daryl, if you want to step back from the microphone. Mr. Steele, is there anything to comment on today? Well, welcome aboard.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. This actually addresses a couple of things I've been before the podium, and one is talking about the plan. I take the plan, or a greater portion of the plan is in section 5. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to really go through the document, only a small, and I thank you for today's. But the one that hits home to a few of us that are residents here in the township is the 3 buckets of where the money comes from. And as I go through a couple of other things, I'd like you to think about, based on the plan, how much comes out of for each individual unit or whatever is the public looking to pay? You know, a lot of people have asked this question many, many times, is how much does each new residential or industrial increase my taxes to me? There's, of course, at the end when residence takes place in it, and that capital goes into AMP and then split amongst the other side. So totally understand that side of it. But, you know, what investment is the public making that? So if you could just think about that for a second as I pass on the other one. And since another thing that's going to be coming up in the next little while is the OP. And how will or could the OP really change the dynamics of this whole thing at that point? And as Councillor Burns was talking about, the whole rate and where this whole thing fits, and there becomes sort of, okay, you get to a certain point and you need something, an extra unit of something, and there's one that's classified down that. But we tend to look at things over a period of a time and then average it out. You know, how often do you change development charges in order to hit those type of lumps? And then we go back to one of the things that I thought was quite interesting. It was the recreation side of things, that it's underfunded. But it seems that we get a consultant's report that says we're at a huge deficit of parks and parkland. And are we trying to make that deficit up in this one period when previous councils ended up not taking the parkland, but took money in lieu of that? You know, are we now trying to make up for that side? And that does affect the constituents in the area. So I'll turn it over. There's another meeting and I'll be doing a lot more reading at that point.
Yeah, I'll just a couple of things just on that. So the adjustments, I think, when what we charge from DCs is all dependent on what we have planned on the horizon, right? And so there's been some adjustments, and obviously a myriad of changes as to what you can include and what you can't include. It's hard to plan for 10 years when in the last 5 years there's been 5 different changes to what and how you can collect it and how you can do it. But from a recreation standpoint, we have a bit more clarity. Chris has worked on a similar forecasted plan. And so when there's forecasted elements to investment in parkland, that's what we're doing. But I guess the issue is the cash in lieu of parkland. What the studies have dictated is that we need bigger community park areas. And you don't get, I think it's 5% or something of the square feet of developments that you're able to garner. You're not going to get parkettes scattered throughout, and there's not a need for that and identified in the consultant's report from a rec standpoint. What there is for more robust community parks, I think is the term they're called. We all know what it means. Community parks, a bigger, more focal point, more amenities, a concentration of amenities that people can drive to and go to for probably multiple different age groups and services and programs and things of that nature. So that's what's been primarily identified for. And I think that's what's influenced the uptick, is that the Cash and Lua Parkland hasn't cost us a deficit of, we wouldn't have these little parkettes scattered throughout. They just don't do it anymore. And the cost to influence of keeping them up and maintaining them for the amount of, or limited amount of use that we're seeing them use, they're just rusting. I think they're just rusting apart. So there's not value in doing that. And what we're trying to pivot to is actually getting and identifying plans for more robust community parks, which have been identified as the thing that we actually need. We don't need little parkettes scattered throughout the community that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to outfit and then upkeep, and add increased staffing, operational costs from a grass and maintenance standpoint. So there's not, all parks aren't the same. And so what the plans now identify is we're trying to pursue amenities and things like that at larger sort of park areas, rather than just these little, fraction, not even a tenth of an acre little parks to just say, oh, here you go. I checked your box. There's your park. I'm not putting anything in it. Probably right by the road. It's in the least developable portion of land. Like there's no controls on that outside the 5%. And they keep reducing that from 5%. So it's been worth less and less, and it will create less and less. So now that we're saying is, okay, we've got that feedback, we've done those studies, we're going to plan for actually pursuing these things, and you probably will take more cash in lieu of, because that will give you the amount to invest in these more robust community park areas. But Daryl, I know you have a couple other things for some of the other points that Al gave you that I can't speak to. Yeah, sure, we could talk.
Sure. So through the chair, so four questions, 4 points. So you asked about the kind of the impact on the taxpayer of developing new homes and businesses. And so a lot of communities will do like a long-term financial plan or fiscal impact of development to try to assess this. Typically, residential is pretty close to break even, maybe a little bit on the negative side, depending on the type of development, but it's usually pretty close to break even. On the industrial side, when you get industrial, they usually pay a higher tax rate, and the benefit you get from taxes is greater than the cost of the services to provide to them. So typically in industrial side of things, it's better for the taxpayer if you develop industrial, and then kind of close to break even depending on your tax rates for residential. The second question was about, will the official plan change these plans? Yeah, it will. So what'll happen in the typical process is, the township will do the official plan. Once the official plan is completed, then they'll relook at the servicing plans. So whether it's the water, wastewater master plan, transportation planning, recreation planning, they'll look at all the planning for all the services. And then after all of that's done, then the development charge study can be updated, because it takes the information from those studies, aligns it with the official plan, and then we can update that. So as long as it happens within the 10-year period, there's no worries. We will just update the bylaw when they have the information. The third thing was, how often do we change development charges? It's really, so the bylaw expires after 10 years, but if there's a major change, like the official plan is done, and let's say in 5 years, all the master planning is done and all the numbers are different, you can come in and update the bylaw sooner than 10 years. You don't have to wait the full 10 years. And then on the recreation side, about trying to make up a deficit, we're not allowed to with development charges. We're only allowed to identify this is the growth and this is the capital needs we need to accommodate that growth. So if we have a standard of, just making up numbers, 7 acres for every 1,000 people of parkland, then we would take the population and we would multiply those numbers out to figure out how much parkland we need to accommodate just the growth. If we're trying to deal with a deficit, that has to be funded through your cash in lieu or through your parkland reserves. We're not allowed to recover a deficit from developers. I think I hit all 4 points.
Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, to the point you were making about the parkland in lieu of and stuff. I look out back here, in a year and a half, the developers managed to put up a block of 7 row houses. One is occupied. 1 2-story building that finally got occupied around December. Yet when I look around the township, I see way more development happening in hamlet areas like Mount Pleasant, Springville, Ida, like it's outpacing what's supposed to be happening. And the representation, when you look at how you're divvying things up, it's for an urban center down here in the Millbrook area. It doesn't really reflect well on, and I don't know how the development charges apply to all those new constructions going on, but it's certainly, in my little estimation, outpacing what's being planned here.
Yeah, on a numbers basis, it's pretty close. I mean, the number of units, like you said, when it's 7 or 10, I think it was 33 on there. It's about a split. But with regards, I mean, I think it's important to remember the historical element of it. Like, you know, this community really only had one, maybe 1.5 community parks for 30 years, and that was Maple Leaf Park. Like, there was no community park in the village of Millbrook ever, and that's where most of the development has been occurring over the last 15 years. And so now you have one in the Tower Hill South. You know, we have these lands that we're continuing to develop, and so there was a long period of time where the development was occurring in Millbrook, and there was no parks there to speak of whatsoever. And so I think we're catching up, and there's plans. I know there's some environmental constraints around Maple Leaf Park, but we're planning on investments and refurbishments there too. So I mean, you have to go where the land can be acquired to be developed, and usually where we can, in this case in point, you know, with a larger concentrated development, you're able to get acreage that you need without having to pay the millions of dollars for it, to bring those amenities to the community. And, you know, we've done well with we now sort of have some of the soccer fields and the baseball diamonds at Maple Leaf Park and we can't get enough square footage from any development of any capacity to create the same sort of footprint for any amenities, whether it's soccer fields, baseball diamonds, or otherwise. So we're kind of stuck. And you've seen in areas, I think, I want to say it's Durham or Clarington, where they've spent $20 million acquiring these larger parcels to create these community parks. I mean, that's a significant investment that you're going to have to do. But, you know, we have to find places where we can create these amenities and utilize the lands that we have to make the best amenities possible. And, you know, you have to have the development and the development charges in order to have the monies to associate that. So, I mean, there's no perfect solution, you know, like, but the cost of land acquisition is significant, and you can't just, you know, pull them out of the ether. We've had the benefit of some donated land in the past, and, you know, hopefully that can continue, but we also have to start identifying land needs in the DC charges to accumulate, you know, some of that revenue too. Councilor Brand.
Through the chair, so just to reference that one thing, and I'm not sure of the exact timelines, but Millbrook used to be its own municipality, and Cavan Township used to be its own, and North Monaghan used to be its own. So some of those discrepancies fall back to that period in time is all I'm thinking.
Yeah, but we've been in this iteration for about 30 years, and that's been the case for those 30 years. So it is what it is. Anyways, Daryl, thanks again for being here. Al, did you want to come up again? Sorry.
So your explanation of unified areas for specialized sports and things along that line, I fully agree with that. And I guess the question to Daryl would be, is then as we're increasing, and most of that increase is going to be urban within the catchment basis, then basically because of the increase that the DC should be covering the cost of those facilities?
Yeah, so through the chair, to the extent that we can relate it to growth, yes, we've included those costs in the development charge calculation.
So with that particular thing, are you saying 100% if an expansion of the rec center today, would that be 100% of that for the calculation?
Yes, yep. If you're expanding the recreation center to accommodate growth, yep, it'd be 100% related to growth, yep.
the nuance is the management of accounting it for growth, right? Like, because there will be an existing benefit to existing participants or potential any amenity that we add to the fleet, you know what I mean? Just like there's any fire truck that we add, it's not just going to new subdivision, it's going to wherever it's required, right? So the portion of it that's growth related will be DC funded.
And through this, like in chapter 5 of the background study, and afterwards, when you get a chance to look at it, all of the costs that we've identified for parks and recreation services, there is no benefit to existing. It's all being funded with development charges or grants and other contributions in this instance. Yeah.
Good discussion, and thanks for being here, Al. Consideration of the report, we're just receiving information until the next meeting at the August meeting and then a subsequent meeting in September. So the motion would be to receive for information the presentation and any and all comments received during the public meeting be part of considerations for the August 10th, 2026 council meeting. Goodbye. Moved by Councilor Natchoff, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Need a resolution to close the public meeting. Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Next, we are at our presentation from Moya Taylor from the Asset Management Advisor from PSD Citywide with regards to the Asset Management Plan Annual Review. Moya, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for having me. Am I able to share my screen from my end here?
I don't believe so, but we have got you covered. So if you just give us a little heads up, Mark will move the slides along.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council, for having me here today. Moya Taylor, Asset Management Advisor here with PSD. So I'm just going to go over today the Asset Management Plan Annual Review. That is part of Ontario Regulation 58817. We just need to have a look at, your progress in implementing the AMP. Note any challenges encountered when trying to implement the AMP, and then have any strategies to address those challenges. So in this presentation, I'm just going to summarize the township's first annual review since the approval of the 2025 AMP back in September, and I'll highlight the progress that has been made throughout the reporting year. So if you can flick to the next slide, please. So the annual review really focused on 3 questions under the regulation. So we had to look at what was the progress made in implementing the AMP, what are the factors that limited the ability to implement the plan, and if we identified any factors, what action should we take to address those? The review included updates to the asset inventory, the replacement cost, condition information, and also the funding strategies. So overall, the township continues to make really positive progress and remains aligned with the 2025 asset management plan. Next slide, please. So this slide here summarizes the key achievements over the last year. So you can see that the township's total infrastructure replacement value increased from about 155 million to about 168 million. So when we're looking at the 2025 numbers, that's based on 2024 year end. 2026 numbers is based on 2025 year end. So the increase reflects inflationary impacts. It also looks at the updated replacement cost information that was included in Citywide, and the addition of assets and betterments completed during the year, which includes the addition of Fire Hall 1 to the Citywide system. The average condition of the township's assets improved from 71% to 74%, so they remain within that good condition category. There was also significant progress made in collecting condition data. So there was internal staff assessments completed on about half of the stormwater management ponds, and engineering inspections were completed on about 10% of sanitary mains. In addition to that, the Citywide Maintenance Manager module was also implemented for water and wastewater, and they're looking at implementing for IT assets as well with an estimated completion in 2026. Next slide, please. So currently, the township is managing about 167.6 million in infrastructure assets. And again, that's based on 2025 year-end data. So the largest asset categories are still the buildings, facilities, water, wastewater, and the road network. The most notable changes to the replacement costs came from the buildings category and the equipment category. The increase in buildings was primarily because of the upgrades completed in 2025 for Fire Hall 1 and the Old Millbrook School. In the equipment category, the increase is largely due to the acquisition of a lot of Dell laptops and a new backhoe. And the annual review ensures that these values remains current and reflects changing market and conditions and asset inventories. Next slide, please. So since the approval of the AMP in 2025, staff have really integrated asset management into their annual business process. So each year, asset management information is being used during budget development and long-term capital planning discussions. Throughout 2025, staff completed their year-end asset updates, which included reviewing replacement costs, incorporating asset additions and disposals, and of course, continuing to improve that condition information as well. The township also continued the implementation of recommendations included in the AMP. This included that maintenance manager module software enhancements, also the collection of the conditional data as well. And they also continued with the asset replacement reserve contributions. So overall, the implementation remains consistent with the roadmap that we established in the 2025 AMP. Next slide, please. So one of the most important requirements of the AMP is demonstrating that the township is progressing towards those proposed levels of service and funding objectives that we defined in the 2025 AMP. For tax-funded assets, the township selected a funding strategy that gradually increased funding over a 10-year period. And council did approve a 2.65% increase in municipal residential taxes for 2026. So combining this with the commitment to continuing that asset annual replacement reserve aligns with proposed funding that we outlined for 2026 defined in the 2025 AMP. For the rate-funded assets for water and wastewater, a rate study was completed. As a result of that rate study, a 3% increase for water is implemented and a 2% increase for wastewater. And this also aligns with the funding strategies that we identified in the AMP and the township's long-term sustainability goals. So you can see here that the targets were met for the tax-funded and rate-funded assets from the 2025 AMP proposed levels of service. Next slide, please. So the annual review found that there were no significant factors that prevented the implementation of the AMP during this reporting period. We did, however, want to identify some factors that continue to influence the long-term implementation. So basically some things to keep in mind, keep a lookout for as you're going forward in the following reporting years. Inflation, of course, remains a large challenge. There's rising costs for construction materials, equipment, and contracted services. This is increasing our project costs and, of course, reducing purchasing power. Council decisions regarding future tax and rate increases will also impact the township's ability to achieve those long-term funding goals. And with the election coming up in 2026, that can also affect future priorities and funding decisions. And finally, as the condition information and inventory information continues to improve, that could impact future forecasts and you might have a more accurate data becoming available for future forecasting. Next slide, please. So in regards to next steps and looking ahead, the staff will continue to advance the township's asset management program through several key initiatives, and they're highlighted here, the key priorities. So we're looking at including completing the implementation of the maintenance manager module for the IT assets, as I mentioned, in 2026, continuing those condition assessments for the stormwater management ponds and the sanitary mains. Also looking at continuing the annual review of the asset inventory, which includes the replacement cost and the future forecast. We're also recommending to continue with the planned contributions to the asset replacement reserve and looking at incorporating the newly adopted water and wastewater rates into your future financial forecasts. They'll also be continuing with the annual asset data reviews, monitoring inflation impacts, and beginning preparing for the 2030 AMP update. So if we continue these actions, we'll be able to strengthen decision-making and support sustainable infrastructure management. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what the 2030 AMP requirements are, as part of Ontario Regulation 58817, there is a full update required of the AMP in 2030. It requires a detailed reassessment of the township's entire infrastructure and their long-term financial strategy. So have to continue to improve the asset inventory and collect additional condition information, which you guys have already begun doing. But particularly for assets where condition data is currently limited, it's really important to try to transition to more condition-based, assessed-based condition as opposed to age-based condition. So that'll help improve the confidence in your future infrastructure forecasts and your investment decisions. It's also going to have to be included that you review both customer and technical levels of service to make sure that that still aligns with what is appropriate and affordable. This helps ensure the relationship between your service expectations and your infrastructure performance and your funding requirements. We also have to review the lifecycle management strategies and the risk assessment strategies as part of the 2030 update. And we have to fully update the asset inventory, including updated replacement costs, current inflationary trends, growth projections, and reserve balances. So ultimately, the next full AMP update will provide a new roadmap for managing municipal infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the township continues to successfully implement the AMP that was approved in 2025. The annual review demonstrated that the funding objectives are being achieved, the level of service are being maintained, and asset data quality continues to improve. The township is still on track with its approved funding strategy, and it continues to invest its infrastructure proactively, which is reducing the risk of future service disruptions. The township did not encounter any significant barriers to implementation and remains committed to continuous improvement. This satisfies the annual reporting requirements under OREG 58817. Next slide, please. So thank you all very much for your time, and I'll welcome any questions.
Thanks for that presentation, Moya, and thanks to staff for all the hard work. I know asset management is a big time constraint and a big commitment, but obviously it's a necessary one, and it's obviously the investments and commitment have been paying dividends. Questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Sorry, through the chair, how many actual stormwater ponds do we actually have in the entire township? And is the entire township is what reflected in this report?
I direct that question to staff. The report that I had is that 50% were assessed this year.
I can see them pulling it up right now. Might have to give him a minute. This one's, I think he's got it.
So through you, Mayor, we have 6 ponds total, and I actually just completed the review of 3 of them. So yes, it would be for the total township.
Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, and the other thing I was asking on that year in review, our percentage of good has gone up. I'm assuming, and I don't want to, but is that because we built 3 new buildings that are brand new and it's changed the dynamics of what is falling into disrepair and what needs replaced in the future just because we built some new things?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Sorry, through you, Mayor. So the condition assessment is replacement cost based. So when you have a higher value of assets that are newer, then that's kind of contributing and adding to the condition of the overall portfolio, because we have a higher replacement cost falling into the very good category now.
Follow up.
Through the chair, that's what I was expecting, but it confuses me on the asset portfolio snapshot, and I can't give you a page reference because I have no numbers on my documentation. But our fleet has gone down in replacement costs, and I've been watching us buy things over the years that are very expensive and only more expensive in the future. I just didn't understand how the fleet replacement would be lower now.
So that for us, that takes into account when we run these reports, it's based on the asset disposals and additions that were done throughout the year. So the year-end replacements that were done within citywide. So these values just come straight out of citywide from our end.
Yeah, and traditionally the biggest depreciation is in the first few years. So where it'll show up a lot when it's brand new, that if it depreciates by half after 1 year, well, the replacement value is half. Right? So you're not replacing at the same value holding throughout. Once your assets started to depreciate, it's a big depreciation in the first few years, and then kind of levels out for the cost of replacement, right? So you'll see a bigger dip when things are sort of in those first few years after when they're newer, and then it'll sort of lessen out. Thanks, Mark. Follow-up question, Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair. So the other thing I wasn't clear of, we're mandated to do a yearly review. And yet we're kind of mentioning how 2030 is going to be a big moment. And I'm thinking in my head, if we're doing it every year, how's that really going to be a big difference at the 2030?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, to council. So the 2030 is a full update of the AMP. So right now, like the AMP can stay consistent. This is, satisfying the annual reporting requirements, making sure that we're just doing a snapshot of, the big differences from last year to this year, see if there's any issues with implementing those proposed levels of service. But, the full overall portfolio, the summary of the replacement cost, the condition in the AMP won't be updated fully. This is just, a separate report to show the updates yearly. When you redo the AMP, you do also have to analyze, looking at the, your life cycle management strategies, your risk profiles. You have to look at your proposed level of service targets, your current levels of service, and then any updates if you want to start measuring different metrics. So it is a full overhaul of the AMP, similar to when you first implemented the AMP, as opposed to just a quick snapshot of an update of how you're progressing and if there's any problems between, implementing the proposed levels of service that were outlined for the next 5 years.
Yeah, maybe Ms. Pope might want to weigh in on this one too, but if you might recall, like we're fairly early on, municipally speaking, in the asset management world. Like it's only been around for 15 or so years. And over the course of the first, I want to say 12 years, there's been different milestones where what you needed to include and reflect in your reports has been changed. So I believe we're pretty much all incorporated now. And then 2030 is going to be like that sort of province-wide, sort of like, okay, everything's in now. Where are you at? From an asset management standpoint, the province is going to want to know where all of the various municipalities approaching asset management in their own way, where they're sort of who's healthy and who's, sort of dragging behind a little bit. So I think this is only the second year where everything's been included, but maybe Ms. Pope wants to clarify a bit more about that history.
Sure, through you, Mayor, to all of council. Basically, we started out in 2009, first recording assets on your financial statements and the purchase of Citywide through that period of time and our FIR so that we could report on that data. But asset management then has grown, and there were phases in the last segment where it started with the core infrastructure, was the water, wastewater, roads and bridges. And we had to have that data in, and then we had to add in the rest of the data, which was our equipment, our buildings, et cetera. So 2025 is actually the first year where every single thing is in. We've been in advance of those milestones through the years. So we had a little bit of the extra done above and beyond, but not all completed. So we've met all the different milestones. Because of COVID, they did extend it out. So it was originally supposed to be 2024, it went to 2025. Either way, now that we have the 2025 all in, everything in there, now we're doing refinements. We're trying to make sure that we're using the Citywide database to pull out the data when we're talking about the budget, put it back in as we're purchasing. And it's a constant living document that's moving and working with the municipality. It's not just sitting on a shelf and being ignored. And so that is one of the reasons why the legislation was to bring back a report to council annually, because you are supposed to use your AMP in your decision making. And if you're not, then there's a problem. So this is a way of bringing it back to councils, letting you know we're still in line. This is what our priorities are. This is what we're trying to do. When we hit 2030, it'll be everything again to basically take a look at, but all those additional items on that excellent slide that Moya provided. And it's reassessing the inventories, updating condition and risk. Because some of those things, even though you're annually reviewing it, now there's a visit needed to go out to that site, or you need to contract someone to come in and review something and to see how are the conditions from when you established this in 2025. So the annual updates is us in-house, the changes that are happening every year, letting you know how we're kind of reporting on our report card. How are we doing? But when you get to 2030, it's a in-depth, similar to like the development charges study. It's an in-depth review coming back again and refreshing those details. So we're looking at life cycle. Are our assets lasting as long as what we said they were in 2030, or are they not? Should we make those adjustments and changes? So it's kind of like that full picture as opposed to just your annual update. And it's been fantastic for us. In the report later from staff, where we have an asset management coordinator who's working with all of our management team and our senior team. We're able to get that data in and out, and that's continually growing. And with the maintenance manager and the improvements there, all of our databases there, and we're expanding even now with the budget software going through the summer and making sure that, again, what we're putting in, we're taking out. It's a constant cycle. It's not sitting on a shelf. Annually, we'll update you. You'll get a wholesome full report in 2030 with any legislation changes or what have you that is requested of us.
Councillor Nacho?
Thank you through you, Chair. You kind of answered the question, but I guess I will ask it anyways. You said everything was kind of fully integrated in 2025. Would you be able to give me the total of what 2024 was, just so I could do a comparative? Because it said that it was 157 million and then 167 million, but would you be able to tell me what just 2024 was, just so I can get an incremental, how much all in meant, like, or how little we were?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, I'll just pull it up real quickly in your executive summary. So in 2024, now the 2024 AMP was based on 2022 year-end data. So it was 215 million was the asset total replacement cost from the 2024 AMP.
Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Chair, is there a mechanism within the AMP to see what assets are replaced on their natural life cycle versus growth?
So the AMP does have a growth section, but it doesn't specifically note which assets would, like, when we look at the AMP, we only look at replacing like for like. We don't actually account for any costs related to growth unless specifically that's been included in the proposed levels of service. So in the AMP, it doesn't define things that you're going to be adding in terms of growth. It looks at replacing your current inventory and what the cost that would be.
Okay. Thanks for that presentation, Moya. We are just receiving the presentation from Moya with regards to asset management, the asset management plan annual review for information. Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Nacho. All in favor? That is approved. Thanks again for joining us, Moya, and thanks for helping us out. And great work, Kimberly and staff. Next, we have the minutes from the regular meeting held June 1st. Can I get a mover and a second to approve those minutes as presented? Moved by Councillor Burns, second by Councillor Nacho. All in favor? Those are approved. And the next we have the minutes from the committee and boards, Cabinet Monaghan Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting minutes from March 23rd. We are approving those as presented. Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Nacho. All in favor? That is approved. On to the report section. I think we have Ms. Page and Ms. Pope doing the capital and operating budget timetable on 2027 council meeting schedule. Ms. Pope.
Thank you. This combined report looks at both the budget timeline and also council's meeting schedule for next year. It's been provided here with consideration for the election. So there have been a few dates that have moved. We are starting the process in July 31st. The first documents will go out internally to senior management, and we plan to be before council in December with final approval on February 16th. So we've moved it to the following meeting just to give us that space just because of the change in our schedule.
Questions with regards to the schedule? I will make a note that just I was asked by the CEO of the library just for a refresher of when the deadline is for her initial submission this year. So if you could just make a note to reach out to her so she knows that deadline, we are going to make a maybe adjustment to our September meeting. So we'll make sure we're in on time. So just a note. If not, we'll look for a mover and a seconder for the council approve the 2027 capital operating budget timeline and the council approve the 2027 council meeting schedule. Moved by Councillor Nacho, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Next is 11.2 annual asset management plan progress report. The report on the presentation we just received. Ms. Pope.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to all of council. I'll just reiterate a few comments I made earlier. So as we use our asset management plan, it is a living document that grows. We pull the data out as we go through the process for the capital budget, place the items back in, and continue to use the database, the Public Sector Digest citywide database for all of our assets. The maintenance module, as mentioned in the presentation, was used this year. It's being used in water wastewater. There'll be further expansions. We'll be using the same module for IT expansion, and there's budgeting coming online so we can provide council with some mid-year reports in addition to year end. So now that we have all eyes on deck with a dedicated staff member, Jonathan, who is working hard and diligently with our entire senior management team, this is keeping the record keeping up to date, not simply being a year-end financial reporting document, but it's an actual living, breathing document that we're constantly updating and using. So that's basically what this process is, just to let council know, and then also to provide the annual asset management plan progress report for you to receive today.
Very good. This is just a formality with regards to that. Any questions with regards to the report, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, just for my clarity, everything's on this Diamond, the network or the stuff that we're using now. Is that working well? Is everything migrated over? Are we at that completion point on all this, how all these other things interlock to our internet access type of stuff?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Diamond is actually our financial software. This is our asset database software. So when we're making purchases and we're paying our vendors as we move through the year, whether it be operating or capital, that's all matched and mapped in our Diamond software, financial software. Those reports are then exported out and the details are imported into Citywide, and that's for the asset part of it. And that's what Jonathan works on. And then he refines that data. He goes back and makes sure that we have proper life cycles in there. He speaks with the senior management team. This all gets updated throughout the year. Then when we come forward to budget, there's an export from the Citywide database to bring it back out so we can have discussions so that there's no asset missed, there's no replacement missed. If we're actually pushing something off because of funding or decision of council, that's getting reflected in the Citywide database to make sure that next year when we pull that report, that new information is also there. So that's the part of that living. If you think of it, the financial side of it is to record the payments and the transactions financially. The asset database actually manages the asset. So we could see whether or not something, there should be improvements or there should be enhancements or changes to service levels in certain areas or even life cycle. It's ways to manage the actual asset, not just record the financial data. So when you're speaking about Diamond, it's the financial software recording the financial data. Asset management is about actually managing the asset itself.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, the recommendation is that council receive the annual asset management plan progress report for information and as presented by Moya Taylor, P Engineering Asset Management Advisor with PSD Citywide in accordance with Ontario Regulation 58817. The mover and a seconder for that report, moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Edgerton, all in favor. That is approved. Next, Matt is up for building planning 963 County Road 10 subdivision application. Matt.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, before you today is Planning Department Report number 2026-17. Mark, if you could flip to Appendix 3 or Attachment 3 that shows the draft plan. As council remembers, we have had official plan and zoning bylaw amendments on this property. This is what we call 963 County Road 10 on the east side of County Road 10, starting from Larmer Line, heading south to Fallis Line, which is right now unopened, but will become opened. And right now we are at the stage of draft plan of subdivision, and before you are, the report makes 4 recommendations. So in attachment 4, we have the draft plan conditions. These are conditions that the developer needs to fulfill before registering the subdivision. The plan is the plan is that it will be registered in phases. So we will see the commercial block in the south be developed first, and then the residential will be developed in the future. So the planning report makes 4 recommendations that they be received for information. That council support the approval of application 15T-25-004 in principle, and that the subdivision be subject to the township draft plan conditions provided as attachment number 4 to this report, and that the township comments be forwarded to the Peterborough County Planning Department for their approval and included in the total draft plan conditions. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Is this the last iteration of this consideration before us? I think we thought it was a couple times, but I think this might be it now that we're moving forward, and just for clarity.
To Mr. Mayor, it is the last iteration that the council will see. We are still going through the site plan revisions for the commercial block. And there are other site plans for the other commercial block and the medium density units.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're very familiar with it by now, for sure. Questions, Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair to Matt, on page 299 of my handout, page 8 of your report, the second last paragraph talks about the possibility of withholdings on the I don't know how you really want to phrase that, but I just wanted some clarity on that paragraph, if I could, please.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Byrne, I'm sorry, which paragraph? Water and wastewater services. Oh. Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Byrne, so right now the zoning that was approved has a holding on the residential portions. So right now there isn't capacity of the wastewater treatment plant, so there is a holding on the residential portion. And that they have to wait until we have capacity at the plant in order to get a building permit to build on there. So right now it's sitting in a holding, in a limbo state until capacity is there. That's all that's saying. So we have official plan policies that say that in order to build, you need to have adequate services. We don't have them, so here's what we've done instead.
Follow?
Through the chair, so can I take from that statement that they're ready to go ahead with their residential portion if we were on board with the capacity, or is that another problem again?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Byrne, I would say that's another problem again. So as market demands, I mean, no one's ready to go. We also don't have our draft plan conditions ready to go. So we're a few steps away from getting to there.
Any other questions? If not, seeing none, the recommendations are before us that the report planning 2026-17 be received for information. The council support the approval of application 15T-25004 in principle, and that the subdivision be subject to the township draft plan conditions provided in attachment 4 to this report, and that the township comments be forwarded to Peterborough County Planning Department. Mover and a seconder for those 4 recommendations. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councilor Nacho. All in favor? That is approved. Next, we have Mr. Wilkinson again with Building and Planning, the Woodland Management Bylaw. Matt.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council. Also before you today is Planning Report 2026-18. The report makes 2 recommendations. One, that council receive and consider all comments related to bylaw number 2026-38, being the Woodland Management Bylaw, and that council approve bylaw number 2028-38, being 2026-38 being a woodland management bylaw. Little history. So on February 2nd of this year, council received a draft version of the bylaw and directed staff to hold a public open house and receive comments from the public and agency partners. Staff did make that draft bylaw available to the community and sought feedback and invited the public to an open house. That open house was done on April 1st, and we had formal comments were accepted until April 18th. I'd like to thank everybody who participated and offered comments to us. It gained us a few insights as to making recommendations. So as this is a complicated bylaw, Mark, if you could flip to the presentation, I'll just walk you through some of the stuff that we heard and some of the changes that we've noted. Mark, if you could flip. Yeah. So going back to the beginning, one of the questions we heard is why are we doing this? So we've had a number of iterations that have come before council to get some kind of tree protection bylaw in place. More recently, in December of 2020, Peterborough County did delegate the authority for us for the township to pass a bylaw regulating the cutting of trees. Mark. And in March 2025, Township Council adopted the strategic plan. So the strategic plan makes a couple of iterations as to why about protecting environmental sustainability and protecting the natural assets, and specifically references the enhancement of reforestation, developing policies to control and regulate tree cutting in designated areas. So that's what we sought out to do. As I mentioned, in February, we presented a draft bylaw to management, and the bylaw primarily seeks to promote healthy growth in woodlands and promote the approved tree cutting in designated areas and regulating tree cutting. So one of the many things we heard from the public and agencies were looking for clarity. So hopefully that we can go through a number of these things just to provide clarity to the public and to council to say what applies and what doesn't. So here we have which trees apply. The woodland management bylaw only applies if you're in a sensitive natural area as defined by the bylaw. So that in the bylaw defines it as if you're in a wetland area, if you're in the natural heritage system, if you're really just the green areas on the map. So we do have those mapped out in the official plan, but rather than asking people to review the official plan and do it on their own, we ask them to contact the building and planning department, and we'll go through a review with you. This is the same thing that we do with anyone who wants to build anything. Their first step is calling myself, Mr. Phillips, and we go through and say, okay, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And we get them to an answer that they want to hear most of the time. Mark? So the exceptions, so there are a number of exceptions that we've built into it, trying to promote the agricultural and rural lifestyle of the township. So for clarity, a permit is not requiring for the cutting of trees outside the sensitive area. So if you're not in the green area, it doesn't apply to you. If it has a diameter of less than 15 centimeters, so small trees don't apply. Not in a cluster, so if you have a group of a single tree, doesn't apply. If it's hazardous, doesn't apply. On the invasive species list, normal farm practices, I'll go through this a little bit later on in the presentation, and own use was one that we were looking at before. That's for firewood, fence rows or fence posts are another one. Mark? So for clarity, people would ask, can I cut 5 trees on my front lawn? Yes. If your front lawn is outside the sensitive natural area and they're not in a cluster of 5 and it's non-invasive tree that is less than or more than a minimum of 15 centimeters or 6 inches in diameter, you can cut it. But for clarity, find out if you're in that area and if those trees apply, just give us a call. Can I cut a single tree on my property? Yes, a single tree can be cut. Mark? Can I cut multiple single trees? So yes, again, we're looking at trees that are in that sensitive area that are in clusters of 5. So what we heard from people are, I've got a tree over here, got a tree over there. Can I cut them? Yes. So we typically refer to those as selective cutting. It's a good part of forestry management, and we want to promote things like that. So yes, you can cut multiple single trees to township. That this bylaw doesn't apply. Can I cut hazardous trees? People were asking, I still have a bunch of down trees from the ice storm. Can I cut those? Yes. Hazardous trees, please clean them up. Can I cut back the blackthorn that's encroaching on property? Yes. So we're only looking at non-invasive trees that are going in. So we're looking at the noxious weed list, the invasive species. Those species can be cut. Typically, those aren't big, thick trees that are around, but we just put them in there for clarity. Can I cut small trees? Yes. Again, we're only looking at substantial trees that we've defined as 15 centimeters or 6 inches around. This was a comment that I sought actively from participants and said, how do you feel about this? This is one of the things that we wanted to hear back from. We didn't get any comments about thickness of trees, so we left it as it is. And for clarity, the diameter breast height, that's a forestry comment or a forestry term that's used, and it's typically about 4.5 feet off the ground, and that's where you measure from. Can I cut trees that are encroaching on my farm? We had a number of people who were from the agricultural community who wanted to know about trees on their farm. So yes, normal farm practices. So we've taken the definition that's from the normal farm practices board. Is a board that meets, that decides what's normal farm practices. But typically, if it's for an agricultural use, you want to expand your field, you want to cut back because it's encroaching on your field, you want to make a new field. Yes, that is exempt and you're not subject to the bylaw. Can I cut trees for firewood? Yes, we are not interested in limiting people for their firewood. So own use does have a limited scope. So we're looking at, are you still providing good forestry practices? Well, hopefully folks, we're not going to be clear cutting for the use of firewood. Those are one of the things that we'll be up to Mr. Phillips to figure out. Can I cut trees of a forest management plan? So a number of the people at the open house had active forest management plans. And as I talked to more and more people, it was something, so I expanded on this a little bit. I'm not an expert in this, but I can give you what I got off the website. So a forest management plan, landowners are eligible or may be eligible through the Managed Tax Forest Incentive Program, the MTIF program. It's done through the Ministry of Natural Resources. It's a voluntary program for landowners who own at least 4 hectares of forest land. And it encourages the responsible stewardship of private forests by providing property tax reduction to that area. So basically, if you have forested area, you register that with the province, you get a forester out, they do all the paperwork for you, is my understanding. They submit it and you get a tax break as long as you're then upholding, as long as you work by the managed forest plan, then you get that reduction and it goes to saving the forest, something the province is looking to be doing. We did have a number of questions about bylaws in general. So Mr. Phillips and I worked on this to say, would you mind?
I guess through you, Mayor, what are bylaws for? There's a number of opinions on that, but yeah, it's generally just a informational slide there, just reinforcing that there's no point in having bylaws if we don't have bylaw enforcement. And what our processes are, like any other bylaw, we always start with education first. I think that's the big crux in this is we're proposing to not really pursue anything through our AMPs or anything like that for the first year. It's really going to be an educational piece. So usually when we have an issue, we go and attend, see what the issues are, discuss the bylaw with the property owner, see if they are exempt. Yeah, a number of our other bylaws, as you know, are property standards, traffic and parking. We're going to roll this out if it gets approved the same way we do that with education first and working with the property owners.
Thanks, Kyle. That's the last slide. So we have any questions? Hopefully the bylaws before you for approval. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt and Kyle. I'll give you a shout out too. Yeah, I think a lot of work's gone into this and I appreciate the presentation. Definitely makes it a bit more digestible because it's, bylaws, by reading a bylaw is confusing. It's a language that's foreign to a lot of folks. So I completely understand that for sure. Because it's, it's not intuitive all the time and sequencing of words can really be misinterpreted quite easily. So I don't hold that advantage. I think one of the more important things that really I learned throughout this process was this managed forestry tax incentive. I mean, when people have asked me about this bylaw, I know that certain, like you mentioned, I was surprised to see as many people have these forestry plans as do, which is a great, from what I understand from those that have them, it's more than worth it when you think of the tax reduction that you're able to benefit from. And it's not a municipal subsidization of tax, it's, you get the money from an alternative revenue stream. So it's nothing again, we're not, spiting ourselves fiscally standpoint. But I've definitely mentioned it to a lot of other, whether they're farmers or otherwise, about the opportunities that for a tax rebate or a reimbursement, I guess is the better term, for a managed forestry plan that has, a little upfront cost, but certainly year over year seems to pay for itself. So it's a great program. And I think in talking, Bridget's not here, but I believe we've included information and links and access to how residents can participate or potentially investigate going through this process to have their property recognized, and then obviously get the benefit on the township website as well if people want more information about it. Because it's free money. It's not free, but it's a nice consistent source of revenue for sure. Questions with regards to the presentation? I'll do Lance and then I'll go to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you through you, Mayor. Not a question as much as just I wanted to thank you, Matt. I was in your office many times over this and the information that people were taking from Hoopla and social media and the frustrations. And I just want to commend you. You did an excellent job I would put you in touch with people and you would directly contact them. They really appreciated that personal touch that you provided. And I think all in all, it was definitely a teachable and learning moment for staff on how to maybe roll out something like this in the future. And you can foresee what potential issues may be. But was really impressed how this all tied together, the program. And as Matt had just said, I have had an opportunity to talk to quite a few people that would qualify for the program, and they were really appreciative and weren't aware of it. So just all in all, we took some lemons and made some pretty good lemonade. So good job there on that. Thanks again.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to echo a fair bit of what Lance has just said. I mean, when this first came to us, it was quite confusing. It threw a number of people into tailspins, and I think you've done a really good job of helping clarify, a lot of this information. So thank you.
Other questions? That's a
Through the chair, to highlight what the mayor said, we have been able to get along in this township for a couple hundred years without this bylaw. And to his point, a lot of people are respectful of the trees and have forest management planning and everything else. But over my lifetime, I've watched all kinds of little small interest groups, sometimes as small as one person. And bureaucrats get to the idea that they can fix things with more rules and more laws. And over time, it usually turns out that it creates more problems than it fixes, lots of times misses the point. I think I heard this crisis that somewhere in Ontario, some developer pretended he was a farmer and clear cut some land somewhere, maybe, I don't know. I have a problem with worrying about that because if any township wants to control the way they grow and the way they expand, I don't think you need a woodland bylaw to fix that. And maybe just don't embrace a developer that's here to make millions of dollars. Start to look at the community first and work backwards from there. I really don't see the need for this bylaw at all. And when I was looking through the notes, there was quite a few objections that you experienced on Earth Day and the other times you've opened up the audience to look at what people want. Did you not see more of a against than for type of momentum when you were talking to these people, or what was the actual outcome of all that?
You want to just read that part of the report, Matt?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. So of the 27 formal comments I received, 5 were by written, 14 by email, 2 phone calls, and 6 in-person discussions. 7 of the 27 were very supportive, using words like generous, well-balanced, and suggesting that the bylaw doesn't go far enough to protect the natural areas. 11 of the 27 were not in support, suggesting it was a slight on government overreach, it was not required, unclear, and not a good use of taxpayer money. And 9 of the 27 requested clarification. Most of the people who requested clarification, I would say, remained either neutral or came around to say, okay, well, if that part doesn't apply, then I support that. A number of members of the agricultural community said, okay, if it doesn't apply to this, then I'm okay with it. And the folks who were in support of it, I would say they were in support of it because of the balanced approach that it gives. And to your earlier point about why we don't need it, I would agree that today we may not, but tomorrow we wish we had it yesterday. So when we see the urban areas that get built up and developed, we look back and we say, why are they so urbanized? So as we grow and as development pressures continue to move into this area, we're going to want to have them. And so that's what this light-handed, balanced approach is supposed to be doing. And that was the guideline that I had. Thank you.
Yeah, and just from my experience, there have been instances where this bylaw would have been enforced in the municipality. I mean, I've had multiple complaints about, I'm gonna call it almost sport forestry, like just not for a purpose, certainly not for a planned purpose. But it has happened in the municipality, but in the absence of the bylaw, there's no recourse. And again, like the bylaw is not something that's to be ever present on your shoulder, looking over every behavior that you do. And I think you spoke to why that's not the case with all of the exemptions. But there is no control that you can put on a developer that purchases land in the municipality in the absence of having a bylaw to do it. There's no control. So unless you have a bylaw that they have to respect ahead of time, there's no retroactive enforcement of a bylaw. Oh, well, we need it now, to Matt's point. You don't have that. But again, I think I'm curious, like I think it's good that you incorporated some of the feedback, because there's elements of the bylaw that I don't like either, but I don't have a good solution. And I've talked to you about it for many instances over the last few weeks about, I just don't like this phraseology, but where, some of the elements I take issue with are currently enshrined in our official plan. So it really doesn't make sense for me to keep myself up at night about terminology or definitions or how we're measuring certain things, when that's what governs the lay of the land now, and that we can always amend that sort of thing out of the gate. But I think this bylaw is, I know we've done this a couple of times in the last few meetings, but I think it would be very helpful to understand after doing this sort of, like I said, we're leading with education first. There's not any intention for this to be punitive or revenue generating. But if you don't have something on the books, there's no penalty. There's no recourse. There's no actions to go back and say, oh, you couldn't have done that. And that's what concerns me, because it is happening already. And, we do have the luxury of having some very well-established, naturally sensitive identified areas throughout the municipality, and we want to protect them. And if you have a bylaw like this, dense urban development, this is going to be a barrier to that. It's not a barrier to general personal utilization of your property. It is a barrier to development in areas where we want to protect the environmental sensitive areas that are already been identified. But I do think it would be worthwhile, then, if council's amenable, I'd like to see this come back in a year and give us a fulsome report about, has it even been enforceable at all? Because to Councilor Burns' point, I don't think you're going to hear much about it until you have an incident where there's individuals doing things in areas where they're not supposed to and not permitted to do it, and people bring it to our attention. But, I think it's good to highlight, and I think a few calls that I got were about agricultural purposes. I have lots of friends in the agricultural space, and they have properties, and forestry management is a part of farming, whether it's building fences or, just from a grazing standpoint or a cropping standpoint. And they don't want to be encumbered, and staff don't want to be called to have to go out there and investigate. It's a busy job, but you need to have a baseline of protections for the times when you want them. And I think you've done a really good job, Matt, in getting us as close as possible. But I do think I would feel more comfortable, because I said, we're going to have a new OP in the not too distant future. And maybe some of those terminology things that are keeping me up at night might tweak and change. So we might not have that in a year, but I think it would be worthwhile to understand, if there's some elements, like, to me, it's the radius element and the clustering. I think cluster is a very strange word. I don't like it, but that's what's in the OP now when we talk about that. I like simple data. I'd love to just take a measuring tape and be able to walk around, because to me, I don't need Kyle to do that. I need someone to hold the measuring tape there, and that's a radius. And what if the canopy looks like this? Or what if I cut a few branches off of this side? It just, to me, is a bit wishy-washy. And so that clustering component to me is where it becomes harder to interpret as just a lay person. I'm not going to get in trouble, or my neighbor's not going to call me, those sorts of things. But I really don't think we're going to hear a lot about this on a day-to-day, on a month-to-month, on a year-to-year basis. But like you said, when something happens and when something comes through and someone's behaving inappropriately, you're going to want this to have that opportunity to say no. And in the absence of it. So I just like this staff to consider doing a fulsome report on a 1 year, a year from the enforcement date, or the year from and report back to council, and give us a full summary discussion. And maybe also in that report, highlight certain definitions or things like that are either changing in the OP or maybe already have changed. When that year elapses, we might have the new OP. So just keeping in mind those sorts of things for that bylaw, I think it would be worthwhile to see how it goes. Because I understand the comments about overreach and the sentiment that we don't need it, but I know that there's been instances where we wish we would have had it, because people don't behave poorly, and there isn't an ability to predict behavior that you want to penalize. You cannot, there's no way, there's no shape or form. So I don't think this is going to create a big issue. I don't think it's going to create any disruption. There might be a few staff calls, and I think we should be proactive in going out there to have as much education as possible. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of blowback or a lot of feedback. And like you said, the feedback on it seemed to go fairly 50-50 split. But I can understand the sentiment about overreach, but it's only overreach when it's asked to be enforced. And I don't think there's gonna be a lot of requests for enforcement, but I do think the underlying value of having it is there's a lot of merit to it. And this isn't a new thing. This has been, like you said, in the report, like this was first discussed, I think, in 2012 or 2010, maybe even before that. So there's been a lot of iterations of it, and I think the one you've come to is as good as I've seen in my term. So thanks for doing that. Questions, Councilor Burke?
Through the chair back to Matt. So if I read this the way I think it is, if it's considered a sensitive area by the government of Ontario, it overrides all the exemptions. It just the way it looks like to me. And then you talk about the tree size and the canopy. If they're touching, it doesn't mention how old the tree is. We're going to plant trees down in the park here at some point in the future. They look beautiful in the picture 30 years from now. Like this whole idea of it just bothers me that we're still talking about people's private property. The other thing I was going to ask, this idea of sensitive land or sensitive area is tied into a little bit about wetlands or whatever. The village of Millbrook's in a floodplain. I keep hearing that every time we go to do something. Is that considered a wetland if it's a floodplain? Like, where do you draw the line on what falls into a sensitive area?
So just while Matt's getting ready, so all the areas are mapped. They're in the OP map now. So the map is the map. There's not a new map. There's not a growing map. It's the map. So it's not about interpreting where these sensitive areas are. It's always been interpreted. It's always been enshrined in our OP. So that's where the maps are. So like parks aren't naturally sensitive areas. So when we're planning, like, again, it only pertains to that, but agricultural purposes trump the natural sensitive area. Like if you're doing ag purposes, that you're exempt, regardless of it, whether it's an environmentally sensitive area or otherwise. So I think it's just an inversion of, and that's a part of the problem with the interpretation is it's not that every next exception, only pertains to things outside that. No, it pertains to them all. So if you're doing ag purposes and it's an environmentally sensitive area, if you're using it for yourself, you're entitled to that. There's no obstruction to it, but I'll let Matt sort of fill in some of the blanks that Bouchard left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to Councilor Byrne. Yes, so if you're in an active agricultural use in a naturally sensitive area, as we've defined it in the bylaw, then the bylaw doesn't, you are exempt from the bylaw. You can, agricultural uses, normal agricultural uses are exempt. The floodplain in downtown Millbrook is not a wetland. A floodplain and a wetland are not the same thing. A wetland attenuates flooding. It's a good thing for flooding. You see wetlands and flooding, but they're two different things. I think the mayor answered it as well as I can. Thank you.
And if, like, for instance, one of the things that I think might be an appropriate application of, I think where Councilor Byrne's going is not everyone pays attention to when this map was done in the initial OP, and there's no plans on really changing it because, certain things that are mapped are kind of set in stone once they're mapped. But if someone has a property that they weren't aware is maybe falls within a naturally sensitive area, is there, like you mentioned, obviously best practice, if I want to do something, it involves a lot of, potentially a lot of tree removal. Ideally, a lot of people will come to the township first, but how are we going to manage those instances where there's just, whether it's someone buying a rural property that's coming from an urban area and doesn't have that understanding? Like, I know we're going to lead with education and there's not the intention to be punitive, but maybe it might be helpful to understand like how we can handle that sort of education when mistakes are sort of made, and maybe talk a bit about that, because I think that would be a helpful thing to know.
Mr. Mayor, back to yourself. So right now, I would categorize people who are moving from an urban area to this area. One of the first phone calls we get is, do you have a tree cutting bylaw in the municipality? Other more built up areas, this is sort of normal practice in more built up areas. So they come here expecting to see it. Right now, the process, if you want to build before you get a building permit, you go through what we call a land use inquiry process. So folks call me or send me an email, or it comes through our portal and they say, hi, I want to build a shed. I would argue that 9 times out of 10 people aren't cutting trees because it's their Sunday hobby. They're doing it for a reason. So if they want to build a shop, they want to build a house, then they come to us before they start cutting. And if they don't, then we have something else to go on through this. But in my time here and my time in Tonbee Conservation, that's not the normal practice.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Thanks for that explanation. Councilor Burke.
Through the chair, now typically or historically, however you want to phrase it, mapping has been less than accurate. Typically, it's was done back in a time when frankly, they weren't that worried about the details. It was just a generality. And then we have progressed to the point where we're trying to find it a fine line. And at the same time, provisions are coming through from Orca and different conservation authority to increase buffers around what they consider sensitive. So I don't know if mapping is the be all and end all to say that this is sensitive. I don't think any of it's actually, I don't know how you even do it to go out and verify that it falls into the parameters.
Through Mr. Chair, Councilor Byrne, so that's what Mr. Phillips and I are here for. We do deal with the nuance. This is not a bylaw where we're nitpicking, you know, measuring feet from a property line to say, oh, you're within the green area. This is how does this tree being cut affect the woodland in its totality? This isn't about the sixth tree that's kind of close to being in a cluster. It's about how does this activity impact the general natural heritage system of the township and the surrounding area. So it's not about whether you're in or out, it's what is that impact and how do we mitigate that? And how do we help protect the general area? And how do we, you know, make those forested areas and continue to have them thrive? This is something that the township has enjoyed for a long time. And just because somebody new comes in or somebody wants to do something doesn't make it the thing that needs to be happening. It's how do we mitigate and how do we work with them to get what the township needs and what they need.
Thanks, Matt. Other questions? Seeing none. There are a number of recommendations. So do I, Cindy, just on that note about coming back and like for a 1 year sort of report, should I add that as a recommendation? Is that okay? Okay, so then the first two recommendations that council receiving, consider all comments related to the bylaw number 2026-38 being woodland management bylaw, and the council approved bylaw number 38 being woodland management bylaw. That's kind of weird. We're in a woodland management bylaw, and 3, and that staff come back after a year of at a full year of implementation to report back on the bylaw. That's fine. Yeah, that's the intention. Any questions or any obscurity about those recommendations? Okay. Do you have a request for a recorded vote, if I'm not mistaken? Okay. Councillor Edgerton, request for a recorded vote.
Through Mayor, I just need a mover and seconder first, please.
Mover and a seconder. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, second by Councillor Nanshaw. Recorded vote.
Councillor Edgerton,
No.
Councillor Natchoff,
Yes.
Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Byrne,
No.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Yes.
Okay, that is approved, and we will look for that report after a year of information and see how we go. So thanks for that. Thanks for all the hard work on this, Matt. I know it wasn't an easy subject, and there's still a lot of ambiguity out there as to how and what the exemptions, play out. So we'll see in a year and see what happens. And thanks for all the hard work. Next item is report CAO capital status. Ms. Hurley, there's a number of things coming off this list if my mind doesn't play tricks on me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to council. The report is before you. If you have any questions, I'm certainly here to answer anything.
Any questions with regard to capital CAO report? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, so on the first page, 381 of the report, we're talking about the farm we purchased down by the airport on Moncrief Line. And these studies have been done. Has there been anything found in this results of these studies that would impair or limit us to what we had originally planned, thinking that that might be something useful down the road for filtration area.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Byrne and Council. So impaired, no, the answer is no. However, we did find with regards to the archaeological study that we carried out a 1 and a 2, and we will be required to carry out a 3. But we haven't had anything as a, maybe like the best thing to do is say, a showstopper of any way. But there are, we will continue to carry out studies. And if you just recently, we just approved going ahead and doing a Class EA. That'll be a very significant study on that property, as well as providing the water over and above a sewage treatment plant. So those studies will continue, and as information becomes forward, we'll be bringing those studies forward to council for consideration and review at that time. But as of right now, we don't have anything that's stopping us from that development at this time.
Thanks, Ms. Hurley. Another question, Councilor Brent.
Through the chair, on the next page, the bottom, we're talking about this, a study going to be done on Brookside Street. The difficulty is schools are going to be out in the next few days. I don't know what the time frame is to be looking at that situation to maybe be prepared for the next school season that's inevitably going to start in September sometime.
Through you again, through Chair to Councillor Byrne. Yes, I mean, we're fully aware of what the concerns are. Our Public Works Department is fully aware of the situation. Whether school's in or not, it doesn't make any difference for us to do the review. So we will continue to have that review, and we'll be reporting back to council. If the question is, will we have that report done by September? I'm hoping so.
Thank you. I can also say, and Chris isn't here, but traditionally we usually play at Bowers, but our team has been playing at Maple Leaf Park a few times, and the new lights work great. I can tell you they came right on, and they were like, you could tell they were new. So, and they're actually straighter than they used to be too. So great work on that. And that was one of the ones I can tell you can cross off the list because it has been done. I can testify. Yep. Any other questions with regards to capital report? If not, we'll take a mover and a seconder for that report. Moved by Councilor Natchoff, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Going back to my next council committee verbal reports. I have a few to get you started, and then I just wanted to give a big shout out and thanks to the members of the Fair Board and all the community and volunteers that made the 175th Fair spectacular. I was able to go pretty much every day, but you know, it was certainly a really interesting and cool phenomenon to see the snowbirds fly over on Thursday. And then we had great polls Thursday and Friday night as well. So just a great job by all the staff. I know Deborah had a lot to do with getting the snowbirds, so that's a big win for her. So I want to shout her out by name, but I know Al and all the other volunteers really made a great effort and appreciated the help that the township pitched in, whether it was picnic tables and things like that. I want to extend their appreciation to staff for helping with everything they needed and getting it to be a great fair. And I heard a lot of positive feedback about it. So congratulations to them. I have a couple updates with regards from the library board meeting, just with a few things. There's been one hire for a student that is doing a placement from Durham College. So we met Dana at the last meeting. She's fulfilling, I think, 105 hours of service at the library through her placement. So we're very thankful for her work. There's been some great work done with evaluating some of the programs that the library runs, so that we've actually reduced some of the programs because there wasn't a lot of participation. But I think if my notes are correct, of the 14 fewer programs, we've only reduced the attendance of the programs by 1. So there's slightly fewer programs, but attendance overall has been sort of pretty flat as you count 1. So they're definitely using the resources better and really coming up with some new great programs that are just having more consistent participation than the fewer far off. And then they also had just received that day of the last meeting on Tuesday, some of the new hardware that was in the capital budget from a computer standpoint hadn't been installed yet, but had been delivered. And so they actually found an opportunity to potentially get one more device or unit. I can't sure which computer type it was, through an application through the actual provider. So they're optimistic they might get a 6th, I think, out of the 5. So that is the extent of my comment on those. But Councilor Natchoff, you have an update.
Thank you through you, Chair. Millbrook Valley Trails, we didn't have quorum in our last meeting. We have our next meeting in a half an hour, so I assume we will hopefully have quorum. We had a really good cleanup day, so the forest, I did the trail report out on Sundays, so it looks excellent. I just want to commend all of the volunteers from the Millbrook Valley Fair that helped with the cleanup. I've had just a ton of really positive feedback on how clean the fairgrounds looked. Maybe the mayor can, or deputy mayor can speak to that as well, because he walks the neighborhood every day, but just really impressed with the whole fair itself. The snowbirds was awesome. Yeah, just lots of positive feedback at the store as well with people coming through. And the trails looked great as well overall. It's a little wet out there, but that comes with this time of the year. And with the GRCA, we had our meeting last week. They're just still working out the nuances of the conservation consolidations across the province, and the yeah, that was it. The first proposal for the budget, and just working with partnerships with the recreational users group and trail maintenance, proposing to maybe reopen some trails that have been closed since the derecho from a couple years ago. So that's moving along. Otherwise, that's it.
Thanks, Councillor Nacho. Councillor Edgerton.
Yeah, last Thursday, we had a Mr. Hack meeting and we discussed two different homes for the heritage underneath the heritage bylaw.
So, can I get a motion to receive those verbal and you have an update, Councillor Brink? Councillor Brink.
Through the chair, yeah, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody that worked on the fair, did the sporting for the fair, came to the fair. I was kind of curious. I thought maybe today we'd find out some numbers for attendance and possibly the prizes that were given out. Township put up those 4 bicycles. Anyways, I wouldn't be a tall objective if somewhere along the line, if there was some film footage of the snowbirds flying over, which was impressive, could be put on our webpage.
Okay, take that into consideration, see what's out there. I know the chair of the board was trying to track down, there was a few individuals, I think they were down near Garden Hill that took it, so. Anyways, we'll see what we can do. And mover in a seconder for those verbal updates. Moved by Councillor Edgerton, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. There is no general business, no correspondence for information, no correspondence for action. So we're at the bylaws. That bylaw number 2026-38 being a bylaw to prohibit or regulate the destruction or injuring of trees in the township of Kevin Monaghan be read a first, second, third time and passed this 22nd day of June, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached there too. Can I get a mover for the bylaw? Moved by Councillor Natchoff, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. There is no unfinished business, no notices of motion. The confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 2026-39 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held June 22nd, 2026 be read a first, second, third time and passed this 22nd day of June, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached there too. Confirming bylaw moved by Councillor Edgerton, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Lastly, motion to adjourn today's meeting, moved by Councillor Natchoff, seconded by Councillor Edgerton. All in favor? The meeting is adjourned. There's a number of upcoming meetings and I'll read the schedule aloud. Millbrook Valley Trails meets as Councillor Natchoff mentioned in a half an hour. Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting is Thursday, June 25th at 1 p.m. The Kevin Monaghan Accessibility Advisory Committee meets Monday, July 27th. And the next regular council meeting is Monday, August 10th. Enjoy the summer, be safe. Hope everyone enjoys the end of school. And I think I'm speaking at a graduation tonight, so we'll see you there. See you in the township. Take care.